Thank you for stopping by at the Movie Marquee. Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome to the Movie Marquee. Today we'll be doing a bonus spotlight on director Richard Donner. With me are my two co-hosts, Ted.
Hey there.
And Eric.
Welcome, everybody.
The four movies that we'll be reviewing will be The Omen, The Goonies, Maverick, and Assassins. Before we go more into our discussion about Richard Donner here, let me read a little biography on Richard Donner here for you. Richard Donner was born on April 24th, 1930. Today's recording is April 23rd, so happy birthday, Richard Donner.
Happy 91.
Yes, 91 years old, and he's thinking about directing Lethal Weapon 5. Crazy. Richard Donner was born Richard Donald Schwartzberg. He was born in the Bronx. He first got his start in TV. He had some work in things such as The Fugitive, Get Smart, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., The Wild Wild West, Gilligan's Island, Tales from the Crypt, The Twilight Zone. Especially on The Twilight Zone, he was the director of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, starring William Shatner. He later graduated to films such as The Omen, the first Superman movie with Christopher Reeve. He also directed most of Superman 2 with Christopher Reeve, but was replaced by Richard Lester. He also has done Goonies. He's done Lady Hawk, The Toy, Scrooge, the Lethal Weapon series, as we said, Maverick and Assassins, Conspiracy Theory, and a movie called 16 Blocks. That's just to name some of his work. Married 36 years. Good for him. He's been the producer of the X-Men movies. So he's a very busy and talented man. And this is a director that I decided to choose for the spotlight. So let's talk a little bit about Richard Donner. Eric, you start us off. The first time that you were aware of Richard Donner.
First time I was aware of Richard Donner was the 1982 release The Toy, one of my favorite Richard Donner movies. And then after that, I started watching more Richard Donner movies. And I was really impressed with his Lethal Weapon series, to be honest with you. I thought that was really a pivotal point in his movie career.
Okay, what about you, Ted?
For me, he doesn't come to mind right off the top. He's somebody that I need to seek out his movies. But when you say what movies he's directed, it makes me think and go, oh, okay. He's directed quite a few movies that I like. Probably the first movie of his that I would have seen would have probably been The Goonies. I do enjoy the Lethal Weapon movies, some more than others. But for the most part, there's very few things in there that I don't care for. And there's some in there that I haven't seen. I'm going to have to go and see if I can search and see those movies that I haven't seen of his.
Well, I would say the first movie I saw probably was Superman. And I probably was kind of aware of him a little bit more as a kid, teenager, growing up, mainly because of the Superman movies, especially Superman 2, where I heard there was two directors of this movie, and they kept on saying Richard Donner got replaced by Richard Lester. So that was something that always stuck out in my mind. I think that was like the first time I heard a director being replaced while most of the movie being already shot. My dad took me to go see the Goonies in the theater. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the Goonies. The Lethal Weapon movies, which I really enjoy, we didn't choose those movies this time around because I feel we can do Lethal Weapon as its own thing. And same thing with the Superman movies is because Superman, it's its own thing too and deserves its own kind of spotlight. And then you had things like Scrooge, considered by a lot of people now as a Christmas classic. Anything that stands out to you about Richard Donner?
Well, his longevity of movie making comes to mind, that he's celebrating his 91st birthday and he's still kicking. You said he wanted to do Lethal Weapon 5, wanted to direct that. That's pretty damn impressive on its own. He's got a great body of television and movies behind him. More power to him.
I have to agree a lot with what Eric just said, that being able to last as long as he has in Hollywood and to have as many successful movies to his credit, is really a testament to him as a member of the Hollywood community. As a producer and director, the couple of the X-Men movies are really good that he's produced. And I saw he had produced some other movies that I like. I don't know if there's a particular style that he has that I'm looking for. If you would have said his name, I don't know if I would have connected it to those movies. This is going to be kind of an adventure for me.
I agree with Ted on that one. We're going to be looking at all four of these Richard Donner movies. One of the things that I'm going to be looking for is a directorial style that kind of culminates these four movies, because I really don't know anything about his directorial style. I know the movies, and obviously, the first one we're going to be doing, I know that one pretty good, The Omen, but I'm really looking forward to watching all four of these movies and discussing them. I was really surprised to find out that he directed The Toy. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and I had no idea that he directed that, so I'm definitely going to go back and watch that one. I did not know he did Lady Hawk and Maverick. I didn't even know he did Maverick. It's such a wide variety of movies. You have horror, you have comedy, you have stupid comedy, you have drama, love stories. He's all over the place. It's pretty impressive.
I saw his name a lot at the beginning of movies, a Richard Donner film, especially with the Lethal Weapon movies. In fact, I think his brother plays the captain in the Lethal Weapon series. So, yeah, I was kind of very much aware of Richard Donner, but I also forgot about Richard Donner. When we were looking at directors to do, Richard Donner's name wasn't like on my short list originally. And then I was just kind of doing a little bit more research, and I'm like, wow, this movie, this movie, this movie, this movie. And I was like, I got to do this guy because of all the different movies that he's done. And there was something about the movie that we're going to review first, The Omen, that made me go, wow, I would really love to revisit that movie. And I think that's what I like about his movies. They are very much rewatchable movies. They're fun and exciting movies that I could watch over and over and not be bored with. The other thing that I got from Richard Donner watching not only these movies, but listening to just people talk about him, is that it's a family set. Even on like movies like The Omen, everybody is kind of like a family and working together to this all work. You see it in the other movies, like we're going to review The Goonies and in Lethal Weapon. Whenever there's something connected with Richard Donner, people come out and support him. Richard Donner was a little bummed out that cast of the Goonies that he had kind of lost connection with them, and Steven Spielberg kind of arranged that the cast of the Goonies show up at a vacation spot of his, and they were only going to be there for a couple of hours, but Richard Donner, as soon as he saw them, said, "You guys are staying the night. We're going to have a good time." And that's the impression I get out of him, is when he does these movies, it's a total collaboration between everyone involved. He has his job. He doesn't act like he's the head of everything. So that's where I'm at so far with Richard Donner.
So there's not a lot of conflict on the set between the actors and the director and the producer?
I could not find any from the research that I did. It seems like people are happy to work with him. If you look at the Lethal Weapon series, if you could stand working with Mel Gibson, I guess, for 6 or 7 movies, I guess that says something about your patience and personality too. Mel Gibson's not always been the easiest person to work with. So with all these movies that we're looking at, if we did have a 5th movie, what would be your 5th movie that we could have reviewed?
Probably be Conspiracy Theory, because I do like that movie. It's not like a super big favorite, but I do like it and I enjoy it quite a bit.
For me, hands down, it's A Toy. It's one of my favorite comedies of all time. And actually, it's one of the first movies I can remember actually seeing. Probably saw it on cable, but it's one of the first movies I can actually remember seeing and really enjoyed it. I think it holds up. It's one of my faves. So that would be it for me.
Outside, of course, Lethal Weapons and the Superman movies, I would actually go with Lady Hawk. I'm actually a pretty big fan of that movie. I thought about this seriously being the 4th movie. It just came at a time where, well, Michelle Pfeiffer was at her peak. She was becoming a very strong actress at that time.
Matthew Broderick was way up there.
And Rutger Hauer, he had some really good movies early on in the 80s. Blade Runner comes to mind. The star power of those 3 made me very interested. And I've always been a sucker for medieval time type of King Arthur type of movies. Those type of movies draw me in, so that would have been my 5th movie. His career starts actually directing movies in the 60s, but he doesn't have his first success until 76, The Omen, which amazingly enough led to Star Wars getting a little bit of a bigger budget and may have helped Star Wars actually go a little further. I don't even know where to say his prime is, because from 76 you have The Omen and Lethal Weapon 4 in 1998. What do you guys think as far as he stands up comparable to other directors? Do you have a director that you kind of maybe compare him to?
Honestly, I don't. I think it's too early in my analysis to really compare him to another director. I would definitely hold him in very high esteem with directors of that era, just based on the movies that he's done. I mean, if you're looking at the 70s, you've got The Omen and Superman, which are two huge blockbuster hits, well known movies that people know the names, they know the movies. And then in the 80s, you got The Goonies. Everyone knows The Goonies, everyone knows Lethal Weapon. And coming to the 90s, yeah, you're kind of sliding down a little bit. But, you got Maverick, you got Lethal Weapon 4. I'd say he holds up.
After you asked the question, I've been trying to think of a good comparison. I'm not exactly sure. I'm kind of on the fence as far as that goes, kind of like Eric is. Because we're going to be discussing The Omen first, I've seen Superman numerous times. He's definitely an 80s style movie maker. So you get that early to mid 80s. There's a definite style there that you can see that he fits into that mold. Almost kind of like a young Steven Spielberg before Steven Spielberg hit massive, big time. It kind of has that kind of feel. But even by the time the 80s roll around, he's been a TV director and then a major motion picture director with The Omen. It's kind of a hard question right now to say about who he would be comparable to. If we look at a lot of the movies that he's directed, I would say that he benefited quite a bit from the summer blockbuster theme. Because you look at Lethal Weapon and Superman, those are, you would consider those summer blockbuster type movies. He's definitely a mainstream movie maker. There's no doubt about that. He's not an auteur, so to speak. He's going to make a popcorn movie based off of just everything that we've said there.
He's definitely not a comparative to a Kevin Smith when it comes to
Yeah,
directorial
that's
style.
true.
No.
I don't think he
No.
ever broke any ground. I think he's just a good movie maker. Some directors just have an uncanny ability to pick a script and then pick a leading man or lady to fill that script. And it seems that Richard Donner did have quite a good relationship with Mel Gibson. And there for a while, from the late 80s into the mid 90s, Mel Gibson was A-list superstar. Very few stars shined as bright as Mel Gibson during that time. And I think he has to thank Richard Donner for that, because, I mean, 4 Lethal Weapon movies and Maverick, Conspiracy Theory, those are some of Mel Gibson's biggest hits. I think that that's what you're going to get from a Richard Donner. You're not going to get an art film like a Wes Anderson or Kevin Smith back in the 90s. He's not making those type of movies. He's making a good popcorn blockbuster film. He's going to fall into that category where his movies are going to be better than somebody like, God forbid, a Michael Bay or one of those blow 'em up movies that he does. But it's going to be better than that, but it's not going to rise to the next level of director that we've talked about in the past, like a Stanley Kubrick or even a Sidney Pollack.
So let me ask you guys this question here, because I honestly don't know the answer. And we're talking about Richard Donner's directorial movies that he's done. Why was he fired, or did he leave Superman 2?
Creative differences between him and the people that hired him. There's a big documentary on that where they just didn't see eye to eye. And the funny thing about Superman 2 is he filmed Superman 1 and 2 at the same time. So 80% of Superman 2 was
Right.
done by the time they replaced him. And they replaced him with Richard Lester, actually. They went with a different Richard. And the interesting thing about that as well, you had people like Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman that didn't come back to reshoot anything when they got a new director. So they had to use what they had for those actors in the second movie. I think that's why you see Superman's mom show up in Superman 2, because they couldn't get the shots with Marlon Brando because he didn't want to come back, and Gene Hackman didn't want to come back.
So that's kind of a testament to Richard Donner.
It could be. They might be showing allegiance to the director. And you know what, though? When a director gets canned 80% of the way of the movie, you kind of leery about jumping into a project that somebody has to mop up the mess. 2 things I'll say about Richard Donner. One is, I think even in the action movies, I think he gets a lot of emotion off of his actors. his actors are giving real emotional responses. Even if you look at Riggs and Murdoch in the Lethal Weapon movies, there's some real emotion behind there. Conspiracy Theory, it might be a crazy little movie, but Mel Gibson is actually extremely good in that movie, playing a guy who's just all over the place. And the other thing that I see with him, he's the creator of the superhero movie. If you look like movies like Batman and especially Spider-Man, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Mans, I think you see a lot of Richard Donner in those movies because he created the formula for the first superhero movie. We're now so spoiled with Marvel and DC movies. There was a time where nobody wanted to touch a superhero movie.
That's true. Pre-78 wasn't even on the books.
And it still stands. Some of the transferable over to Blu-ray is kind of cringeworthy to watch a little bit. It doesn't look right, but as far as the storytelling in it, still pretty top-notch.
His Superman, in most circles, is considered the Superman. It's far better than Man of Steel and the other Superman movie that has been put out of recent vintage. So yeah, in a way, he was one of the first to do a superhero movie, and that is to his credit.
I think it's because he has a love for comics. He actually works with comic books. He works with comic book writer Jeff Johns and an artist called Adam Kubert, and they work together on Action Comics. They collaborated together on Last Son and Escape from Bizarro World. And when he did those were like in 2006. I think he's like 70 at that particular time. I mean, he's even mid 70s. And he's still active in things like comic books and the executive producer of the X-Men and X-Men Orange is Wolverine. And he was the executive producer for The Lost Boys. He has a lot of interest in comic book type of style movies.
Well, and just after you said that, just sitting here and thinking back and kind of trying to replay some of the movies, Conspiracy Theory does play out kind of like a comic book. So does kind of Lethal Weapon. They do have comic booky type of feel to them, like a pulp novel or graphic novel type of feel.
Yeah, even the Goonies, to a certain extent, has that kind of comic book feel to it too. I mean,
it's clear good versus evil. Very well defined good versus evil. You're absolutely, and it does kind of have that campy comic book feel to it.
Maybe that's what we're going to find as we go through here. I don't know so much about the Omen, but we'll see.
Yeah, the Omen's not very campy. Yeah,
well, it might be campy, but it's probably not very comic book feeling. So I'm very anxious to talk about the Omen coming up next. We're going to let you all go right now, but definitely check out our 4 movies by Richard Donner. Those will be The Omen, The Goonies, Maverick, and Assassins. And until next time, we'll see you at the Movie Marquee.
See you at the movies.
Later.